So in chapter 12, we're going to explore solution-focused and solution-oriented therapy. And these two approaches are really pretty similar. We'll talk about where they differ, but for the most part, they use a lot of the same techniques, have a lot of the same concepts and goals, and they really stemmed from the same ideas developed by Steve DeShazer. And so we talked previously about strategic family therapy, where Haley and the MRI group really worked towards a more problem and solution focused approach to family therapy as opposed to some of the earlier theories that are really more focused on deep reflection and insight and a long-term process involved with understanding more about things like roles and dynamics in the family and the past. Um, and so now thinking in terms of context and timeline, um, these theories, solution focused, solution oriented, were developed in the 80s and 90s, so more recently. And Steve DeShazer, his partner Insoo Kim Berg, um, they worked with the MRI model and actually for a time worked with the MRI group in California. And they really took some of those core ideas that Haley developed and changed them to be more solution oriented and changed. He took some pieces of the strategic family model, but changed a lot of it and evolved it into this idea of finding hidden solutions that are already within families. They just can't see them because they're too close to the problem. And so giving the counselor the position and empowerment to help families uncover some of those hidden solutions that they already have within themselves. And so these two were married, and they developed this theory while they worked with families in their own institute in Wisconsin. And again, they were around and publishing until pretty recently. So DeShazer died in 2005 and Berg 2 years later. So they've been pretty modern and consistent voices in the family therapy world and the solution focused world since then, because they've branched out and written about some of their ideas in the context of some other issues like substance abuse and some other mental illness issues using the same solution focused model. And so they developed the solution focused therapy model. And then later that idea was kind of morphed and developed into what's called solution oriented or sometimes called possibility therapy. So we'll talk a little bit about both. So both of these models really focus on opening up space in family relationships for really understanding family dynamics in a new way. So they both say that families get so caught up in their own issues and problems and behavioral patterns, because again, it's a behavioral approach, that they can't see the possible solutions because they're so overwhelmed with the problems that have developed. And so by coming to counseling, the counselor can create some space and perspective in relationships so that family members can see possibilities and solutions that were always there. They just couldn't see because they were overwhelmed with the problem. And so it's just this idea of observing and providing thoughts, considerations, ideas, bringing about new understanding of family dynamics, and offering new possibilities to families to help them arrive at possible solutions. So the therapist really has still one of those kind of expert roles where you're directing the session, you're asking a lot of questions, and you're really guiding the family towards finding solutions instead of focusing on the past or dwelling on things that have already happened contributing to the problem. Both of these have the understanding that families are really dynamic and different and multicultural, and that there's no single way of being or of seeing things or of conceptualizing things. So the possibility and future focus of these theories allows for families to really develop what's going to work for them in their own context instead of pushing a singular idea of what a family should be and how they should interact. And so families according to these theories, come into counseling with both problems and solutions. It's just the work of the therapist to help discover the solution through the therapy process. And so in that, the past can be recognized or talked about, and that's really more in the solution-oriented, focused approach. But really the emphasis is on the future, on the present, on possibilities of what's going to happen and what can change as opposed to what's already going on. And so these solutions are really better use of time than dwelling on the past and dwelling on just complaining about problems, according to both of these theoretical frameworks. So in addition to that, client resistance is minimized by focusing on the future and focusing on possibilities, because according to both of these theories, resistance really comes about when you're emphasizing the problem too much. And so changing that focus to being more about solutions and possibilities for the future would combat a lot of that client resistance. So there's not necessarily as much emphasis on the relationship. There's more emphasis on the counselor really guiding the therapeutic process and helping the family find solutions as soon as possible. So some key concepts for both of these approaches. They're both very strengths-based. They're both very future-oriented, not a lot of emphasis on the past. There's this underlying belief that clients have their own capacity, they have the capacity to change things for themselves, and they have already their own solutions. They just haven't discovered them yet. And so in this, the counselor is really a tool, and the clients are really doing all of the work and finding all of the solutions within themselves. And they always had the ability to do that all along. They just didn't have the space where they could focus on the future instead of dwelling on the past. And so emotion and feeling matters because often it gives you indicators of what's going on. But you're not going to spend sessions doing a lot of reflecting, focusing a lot on emotion. You're really focusing on solutions. And based on if you're more solution focused or more solution oriented, there are varying degrees to which the solution needs to connect to the actual problem. One approach says that it doesn't really matter if the solution connects to the perceived problem as long as it improves things, and the other says that it's really important to understand the problem to really find the right solution for long-term change. So to some degree, the solutions may or may not connect with the perceived problems the family is bringing to you in session. And so counseling really is focused on possibilities, on solutions, and DeShazer emphasized that therapy is not just a place to come complain about your problems, but a place to come find change and solutions for the future. So a lot of overlap between solution focused and solution oriented. Really the main differences are that there are differences in importance of the idea of conceptualization, of building the relationship with the client, of understanding the core issues of the family. So solution-oriented is more interested in working down the trunk of the tree, and solution-focused is okay with staying in the leaves as long as it fixes the problem. So a solution focus doesn't really worry about understanding the past, understanding the problem, understanding the core issues. It's just focused on what helps improve the existence, dynamics, functioning of the family. Solution-oriented encourages the therapist to take some time to really develop that rapport and connection between the therapist and the family so that you can really understand the underlying problem and connect solutions that really make sense for that underlying problem. So there's more acknowledgement of past events in that those past events have brought the family to seek counseling, have brought the family to this place of chaos. And so again, you're not spending sessions and sessions on reflecting, feeling, and understanding the past and discovering why things are going on, but you are taking some time to really understand the whole picture of things before you start introducing potential solutions into the picture. So therapeutic goals are pretty similar for each approach. Really, the overall goal is that the family already has the potential solution. So your goal as a therapist is to really uncover that solution that already exists. The family just can't see it. And so engaging clients in the strengths-based, optimistic conversation about the present, about the future, um, really emphasizing that they can do it, that it is possible to change, that they are doing some things right, and we can just make those bigger so that they help with the problems. Because um, clients come to counseling because they're stuck. They're stuck in their patterns of behavior, they're stuck in their problems. And so the goal of both of these approaches is to help the client get unstuck so that they can start to see new solutions, new possibilities to help with the problems they bring to you. And so it's really this process of, again, trial and error, similar to strategic family therapy, where you're just trying different solutions until you find what works. But in these approaches, those solutions should ideally be coming from the family. They should be generating their own ideas about things they'd like to try in between sessions to try and make things better. Um, and so, really, you're just kind of repackaging and reusing skills and strategies the family already has and is already using, just in a different way that is maybe more effective or includes different kinds of issues that weren't being addressed before. So, the therapist's role overall for both is to really work with the clients in a strengths based way to help them move forward. So, focused on the future. There's a bit of a difference in role between these two approaches just because of that emphasis on relationship versus emphasis on solution. So, in solution oriented, um, you're really taking time to develop rapport and relationship with the clients. You're displaying more empathy, you're using more reflection, paraphrasing to understand what's really going on. And the theorist who developed solution oriented talked about co creating possibilities. So, working with the family to create possible changes in patterns or generate possible ideas about what could improve the functioning of the family. Now, in solution focused, um, the role of the therapist does not involve as much emphasis on that building of rapport. So you're kind of more in that expert role. So really, you're guiding the process a little bit more than you are in a solution oriented way. There's not as much emphasis on that co creation, it's more about a guide. So you're guiding the family through the process with questions, with summaries. You're kind of wondering about things that you're curious about out loud, to kind of lead the family in a certain direction. And so you're helping the family still discover new possibilities and solutions that they already have, use new skills that they already are using in different ways, but you're doing it in a more directive kind of way. And so these techniques are used by all of, like both approaches use all of these particular techniques. And some of them are probably familiar because they're the same that you would use in solution focused therapy with individuals. So the miracle question, so this idea of, if you woke up tomorrow and this problem were magically solved, how would you know? What would be different? What would that look like? And so the idea behind this question is that you're discovering both things that are contributing to the current problem because they would be different or they would be gone, but also focusing on possible skills or solutions that can come out of imagining what would happen or what would change in the future, because then you would kind of follow that up with, okay, well, what's keeping you from creating that change? What kind of barriers are existing? The exceptions question. So thinking about, because again, they emphasize that families come in because they're so overwhelmed with being caught up in the problem, they can't see possible solutions. So helping families think about, well, was there ever a time that you weren't having this problem? Was there ever a time that you weren't arguing? Was there ever a problem? Was there ever a time when you had better communication going on? And then what was different at that time? What were you doing differently? What kind of things were different in your environment? So that kind of question does get at the past a little bit, but really it's about taking what happened and then using it in a future oriented way. Scaling questions. So both of these approaches are really fond of using, like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how bad is this problem today? How bad was this problem a year ago? How bad is this problem from week to week? For two purposes, really. The first being to track progress, and the second being that if there was any kind of progress at all, what changed, what brought about those improvements, what was different that brought you from a 4 to a 5. So being able to identify those kinds of skills or solutions that the family's already using, and then just making them bigger, using them more often, using them more purposefully. Signs and questions of difference. So this is a pretty simple concept. It's just using reflection skills to notice changes or differences, and then having the family members really make observations about each other and notice changes or differences in each other, in themselves, in different kinds of conversations and different kinds of interactions, and trying different solutions. So trying out different things and then just noticing what changes. So the idea is that you're changing both the family member's perspective, but also, again, tracking and noting things that are bringing about improvements in the family. Formula first session task. This sounds very complicated, but really it's just taking an assessment of what's going on with the family, what's working, what kinds of things the family would like to keep doing because they're working, and what kind of things they would like to change. And so really this leans towards that strengths-based perspective of here are things that we're already doing that are working pretty well, and we want to make sure that we keep doing. Because when you start changing a lot of things in a family, sometimes they can let go of the things that were working because they just assume everything was a problem and everything needs to go out the window, kind of throwing out the baby with the bathwater, if you will. So essentially this idea is that you want to keep the baby. You want to maintain the patterns of behavior that are working for the family and just start introducing things that are targeted towards the problem. Prediction tasks. So again, leaning towards that future-oriented focus and thinking about how things might go between this session and next session. This one's a bit controversial because how do clients really know what's going to happen in the future? But it's just this idea of being able to imagine what could possibly be different after we've uncovered these things or developed these new skills and solutions that you're going to try. What do you hope to see that's going to look different? Both approaches believed in giving compliments, and these aren't just necessarily empty surface level, superficial compliments. It's really, they're supposed to be compliments that are genuine and that are emphasizing positive change, that are emphasizing strengths, that are emphasizing growth for the family. So just a way of highlighting things that are going well, things that are changing to be very strengths-based. Embedded messages. So kind of infusing in your conversations with families ways to both emphasize things that are going on and then introduce new ideas or possible changes based on what the family's already doing. So just that's where kind of these wondering out loud questions might come into play. Summary messages are very similar to the summaries that we studied in pre-practicum. So this idea that at the end of each session you would provide a summary of what you covered, and then you would tag on to that some suggestions for building upon improvements that you've seen in the family that they should continue to do until the next session. So the summary that's very familiar to you, but then adding on these suggestions for the future, giving homework to the family based on the things that you've covered. So solution-oriented has its own unique techniques that are used in addition to the previous month we've already talked about. And so introducing doubt, just so a lot of these really highlight that focus on building a rapport and relationship. So introducing doubt, this idea that you might start to question out loud these assumptions, these meta messages, almost like schemas that come out as a family member is talking. So what kind of underlying assumptions are there, and reflecting those back to bring awareness to the family member that they're having these messages, meta messages that are informing their behavior. Normalizing, so reframing problems or emphasizing that other people have these problems too, that the family's not totally broken and destroyed, that some of these are pretty typical things that other families like struggle with, that these are things that are possible to solve, that there's a lot of things that are going well in the family. So just providing perspective and emphasizing that all families struggle and it's really normal, and coming to therapy is really normal and a good thing to do. So just helping the family understand that they're not weird, they're not broken, but there's a lot of possibilities that could be discovered because the things that they're struggling with are all things that can be solved. Changing the doing of the problem. Um, so this idea that you identify a pattern of behavior or interaction within a family member, and then within the family or between family members, and then you would intentionally start changing those patterns of interaction or behavior. And so encouraging, as we discover these solutions, applying those solutions to current patterns of behavior. So the idea of really intentionally connecting the ideas that we come up with what's actually going on and what that might look like and how to incorporate them and how to use them consistently. So really putting some effort to connect solutions with the current kind of status quo of the family interaction. Working with the future, so anticipating and talking about potential barriers that could come up. So the family is starting to show improvements. What kind of things could derail those improvements? How are we going to manage those? How are we going to address this? How are we going to use these skills to maintain this progress? And then multiple choice questions, which are really just a miracle question with multiple choice options. So instead of leaving it open, the counselor might think of some different potential outcomes of a change and ask the family to choose, and each family member to choose which outcome seems like the most likely or the most desirable to them. So it's really just an assessment tool to be used. So a lot of overlap between solution focused and solution oriented. Solution oriented just has, because it was developed a bit later, it just has a few changes and small shifts in focus that emphasize more of that relationship. But both are really meant to be short-term counseling solutions and really are focused on future strengths-based approaches.